Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining us here at GTM Expertise. Thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
That's awesome. So today we're going to talk a little bit about demystifying the world of B2B lead gen, especially in today's landscape. I think that's a really good topic to dig into. Before we get into that topic, though, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about how you got to where you are today and kind of a deep dive into what you are working on at the moment.
Absolutely. So as you can tell from my accent, I'm American, and I spent much of my career in Silicon Valley working for a bunch of startups that you never heard of. And then in 2004, I joined the growth team at PayPal, the early growth team. I was there for almost 11 years, building and running various kind of growth teams as a marketer and a general manager. And around 2015, I left and I became a VC. And that was a great privilege because as an investor, you get to see so many different companies. And I could go from sort of being a mile deep on this one B2B use case to kind of a mile wide and seeing which of these things are patterns versus just, idiosyncrasies of PayPal. Anyways, so I did that for a few years. And I think the biggest thing that struck me was there's so many startups who are wasting millions of dollars of investor money, years of time and energy from really talented founding teams and dying or coming up short because they're making really preventable mistakes. And I'm sure we'll talk about those mistakes today. That's probably the whole point of the episode. But that's what prompted me to leave and found System, which is the company I run now. And so we're sort of like a virtual accelerator / advisory. So we work with teams and sort of help them compress about 2 years of trial and error and experimentation and learning into a 10-week program, reinvent as few wheels as possible, and then get them to this idea that I call growth levers. And that was kind of, I think, my biggest insight when I looked back at my time at PayPal and I was talking to founders was that at PayPal, all of our growth, and I mean all of it, came from like 5 things that we did, literally like 5 tactics. But we didn't only do 5 things. Obviously, we did hundreds, thousands of things, shipped products nobody used, ran campaigns that never paid for themselves. But, $11 billion a year, 70% gross margins. You don't need to have, a very good sort of shooting percentage to make money. But a startup obviously doesn't have that luxury. But, I find the same rules apply. If you take any great startup and look back, you'll see that most of their growth came from a handful of the things they tried. And so if you're a startup, that's kind of good news because you can't do all the things even if you wanted to. You don't have the time or the resources. So then your key is from not trying to do a little of everything, but from as quickly as possible finding those 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 levers that can really drive your growth. And that comes through this process of experimentation and discovery. So anyways, that's what we do with startups in my business. And I assume we're going to talk about how B2B startups can do some of that today.
Absolutely. That was a great intro. Thanks, Matt. From the articles and content I've read from you, and I would encourage anyone to have a look at that content. What strikes me a lot about what you do is around how granular and sort of a lot more granular. I think a lot of people appreciate the need to go to in terms of sort of walking through a workflow or customer journey step to figure out where things are getting lost or where things need to be turned. And I think asking those sort of tough questions has really been some of your success there, is really sort of facilitating those. How do you go about facilitating that? That's probably the first question I had with those companies.
Well, I think even before that, it's fair to ask why. Why do you, because it's a lot of work to get so far into the details of a particular problem. And what I find is just like the solutions are never that simple or obvious. Like if they were, we'd already be doing them. Was it Charles Kettering who said a problem well-defined is a problem half solved? So think about this, right? Suppose you run a B2B campaign and it doesn't work. Very simple. Okay. What kind of, you're sending cold LinkedIn messages and emails and you're not getting any responses. So what do you do next? I mean, that's actually an incredibly hard question because you don't know why it's not working. Do you have deliverability issues? Are they even seeing your messages? Is your domain, blacklisted, or is it going into the promotions folder? If they're seeing your message, is it the right person? Have you really clearly defined your ICP? Is your data good enough to find them? If you find the right person and they read the subject line and the preview text, are you saying anything they care about or not? If you find the right person and talk about a thing they care about, Are you catching them at the right time, right? Because these people, they might be the right customer for your software, but they do not spend 365 days a year thinking about the problem that you solve, right? Like there's so many things that is the from address messed up, is a little image showing up with your email profile. Anyway, so there's a million things that can go wrong. And unless you understand specifically what's going wrong, you're just guessing and you could waste months trying to solve this problem. So anyways, that's why we go into the details. And it's sort of like, I mean, if any of your listeners are engineers, it's just like debugging code, right? You're just trying to isolate step by step. Where is this breaking down? And if all else fails, you just chop the code base in half. You run the first half, it works. You run the second half, it doesn't work. Okay, then you just keep chop till you find it. Although hopefully we could be smarter than that. Anyways, but we're trying to do, for better or for worse, something a lot more complicated than debugging, finding a bug in a piece of code. And besides, Replit probably does that for you now anyways. So the way you do this, the first step is, remember, we're looking for leverage, okay? And there are parts of your business that mathematically can be more or less leverage. So the first thing I do is, it sounds fancy, map your growth model, but it's quite simple, right? You just, where are we getting traffic and prospects? How many of them are converting to marketing qualified leads? How many of them become sales qualified leads? What's the conversion through the sales process? What are the blockers, right? You just map all that out and you put numbers around it. And then you can usually just see a bottleneck in there, right? There's one point which is really poorly performing relative to the other steps in the system. Now, in any kind of operations management or system problem, if you find the constraint, like that's super important, because if you can open up, unblock the constraint, the whole system runs faster. But if you apply your precious resources anywhere else, they're going to be a waste. So the first thing you've got to do is just map your growth model and identify the constraint. The next thing you need to do is just the exercise we went through. Okay, customers are not, like, all of marketing is mostly just trying to get people to do things they're not doing, or occasionally to not do things that they are doing, right? So you've just got to figure out, okay, customers are getting to this point and then they're not doing this. Why not? And there's a bunch of ways to do that, like usability testing. But what we start with, kind of like the catch-all, is jobs to be done interviews. I don't know, do you or your audience familiar with the jobs to be done methodology?
I think you could explain that for folks. That'd be great.
So this was a mental model developed by a guy named Clayton Christensen at Harvard University in conjunction with a brilliant engineer named Bob Mesta. And Bob has been kind enough to spend a lot of time with my co-founder and I. And it's a simple premise, which is that people don't just arbitrarily buy products or services. We pull them into our lives in particular situations to help us achieve a particular goal. We just take a B2B software example. You're onboarding lots of new employees, and it's a pain in the ass to get them each to come in and give you a copy of their passport. So you might, at that point, pull in remote identity verification software to onboard employees faster, because, like, whatever, you're scaling a delivery business and you need more drivers, right? So the outcome isn't verify people's identities, it's onboard new employees faster. So anyways, once you understand that outcome, then you can map the whole journey, because again, they probably didn't wake up and think, I need to go find some software. They probably woke up and thought, God, this business isn't growing fast enough. Why not? Well, because we got enough restaurants, we have enough orders, we can't get enough drivers fast enough. Okay, well, why can't we get enough drivers fast enough? Blah, blah, blah. And eventually you find, I have this problem. All right, well, what if we open verification offices around town so that we're closer? No, that doesn't work. So you're going to go through this whole journey that eventually leads to the software. And so once you understand what's going on in your customer's mind at each step, you can find opportunities to acquire those customers. Actually, a related example to that. So suppose you're, again, running the food delivery business and you need to find more drivers. You might figure out, because again, most people don't just wake up and think, how do I find a food delivery driver job? You might notice that most of your drivers are recent immigrants to the country. And you might find out that when recent immigrants come over, they have these kind of onboarding centers where they get signed up for their healthcare and they get this and they get that. And you could set up a booth at that center and recruit drivers. And then they're going to need commercial insurance. So you could find a partner who sells commercial insurance and they set up a booth next to you, and a motorcycle riding training class and set up next to you, right? And so what I'm saying is, if you understand where your prospect's journey begins and you can go turn up there, you're going to get way more prospects. Anyway, sorry, I'm like completely rambling. But the point is, I guess you asked about granularity. And so
Yes.
we use this jobs to be done interview methodology to understand the entire customer journey at a granular level so that we can find highly leveraged opportunities.
Brilliant. I love the analogies you use there, because I think it's quite daunting to understand when you maps there about the growth stage and figure out where things are going wrong, and kind of can repeating the same thing and going through brute force is a method, but definitely isn't something that yields a lot of results. And to go through that process makes a lot of sense. So you've seen a lot of these companies. You spoke to hundreds of companies and thousands of people. To shortcut those founders out there who are looking for guidance here, what are the most common and or expensive mistakes that you've seen? Both would be great.
So, I mean, there's not many. The first one is hubris. Like it makes total sense. Like if you think about cognitive biases and stuff, right? You start a company, you convince investors you're a genius, you raise a bunch of money, they love your strategy. So you're right. So it's like, let's just spend the money and go run the strategy. And I guarantee whatever you do isn't going to work. You think it's going to work, but just trust me, it's not. Like everyone thinks about, oh, ChatGPT was magic growth story. Everyone just used it and it spread like wildfire. Well, ChatGPT was founded in 2015. ChatGPT spread like wildfire in 2022, right? It wasn't just like chuck it out there. Assume like just because this is completely asymmetrical risk, right? If you're right and you go do the thing, fantastic. But 99.9% of the time you're wrong. So if you assume you're wrong, then you're going to do the thing quickly. You're going to learn quickly from the failure and you're going to be a little smarter. And the next thing you're going to try is going to be infinitesimally more likely to work. So the first thing is just to go in with a bit of humility. The second big mistake is just trying to outsource the whole problem, right? So I understand you get to a certain point, you fundraise, and then there's jobs that you as the founder need to pull yourself out of. You should no longer be your CFO, your own CFO. You should not be doing your own compliance. You shouldn't be handling all your customer service. But those are all jobs that are relatively similar from one company to the next. You can hire a SaaS CFO or operations manager. Come over. But figuring out how to grow your company is not. It's completely unique. It's just sort of like, I have an idea for a product, so I'm going to hire a product manager and engineer, and they're going to go build it. Like, that's preposterous, right? Well, this is just as complicated. So basically, you're not hiring someone to run growth for you. You're hiring someone to figure it out. And that's a completely different and very rare skill set. Most of the people, honestly, who can do that well know it, and they're starting their own companies. And then the mistake people make is they'll want to hire someone who's got like famous logos in this industry, usually with a marketing background. So there's two problems with that. First of all, if they have a famous logo in the industry, like you don't know if they caused that company to be successful or just had a seat on the train. Second of all, this is probably the industry you're trying to disrupt. So the playbook they ran is probably the exact playbook you need to find a way not to run. Because, you're not going to beat Salesforce.com by doing everything Salesforce.com does with 6 employees and $1 million, right? Like that.
Yeah.
That's definitely not the strategy.
Yeah.
And third is like big company employees. I mean, if you ever worked in a big company, like how did you spend your time? It wasn't listening to customers and tinkering with code and being creative. It was making decks and getting buy-in and covering your ass politically. And like, it's just a skill set that's irrelevant. Anyways, so the second big mistake then is just like trying to outsource the entire thing to like a magical unicorn hire. So I guess my main advice would be just like, come in, assume you're wrong, and try to experiment and learn as quickly as possible to find something that works.
Yeah, and I think that speed thing speed and size of those changes can be underestimated there. You really want to be doing smaller, rapid iterations and learn extremely fast from that, because your competition sure is going to be carrying on in the same way, right? And so I think the learning the quickest is best there. You've seen Matt, go on.
Just on the experimentation point, because I think most companies I talk to, they say, yes, we experiment. They experiment a lot. But if you pull back one layer deeper, they're just tinkering around the edges. They're experimenting with email subject lines and ad copy, but they're not really testing fundamental assumptions of their business, like who is the customer, what's the best way to deliver this. They're not running Wizard of Oz tests, false door tests. They're not really examining like what are the riskiest assumptions that have to be true for this business to make sense, and how can we validate or invalidate them in a week. So it's not just experimenting, but it's really thinking big about experiments and thinking critically about the risks, thinking nuanced and critical way about the risks that face your business. Sorry.
And do you, no, it's good. I mean, on that point, to me, it seems like it could also be a completely separate problem in the founder's kind of bias towards not wanting to go and find out that biggest risk, because that's kind of a scary thing, right? To go out and you've been assuming this for 3 years, been telling investors there's definitely this market, it's definitely this ICP. And then, you go and really, really validate that and it comes back and it's not that at all. And you've got to do this kind of pivot, which is necessary, but you're scared about. I mean, are you seeing that as well in terms of the founders kind of bias towards that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, founders must be pathologically optimistic, right? Like the thing they're doing is like, well, this thing doesn't exist in the world, and I'm sure the world needs it. And I'm going to take millions of dollars from a bunch of strangers and convince a bunch of smart people to sacrifice their lives, ignore their families, and come help me. I mean, like this is fundamentally optimistic, but still within that, you can have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. You can either be optimistic and confident that you are right, or you can be optimistic and confident that you can figure it out. And one of those, one of those works, and one of them is a recipe for wasting time and money.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to sort of how things have changed, in the last even 3 years, I think it's changed quite significantly. Lead generation in many different forms. We look at the tech that people use or otherwise. If I'm a B2B startup founder today, what are the best channels you see or approaches in generating B2B leads are? I mean, and contrast that with how it's changed. That would be quite interesting, I think, so people can understand exactly where they should be spending their time.
Okay. I mean, I'd say at a high level, I'll run through all the channels. There aren't very many of them. But the key is don't try to do them all and be like, oh, Facebook doesn't work. Email doesn't work because I, sent one email and it didn't work. The key is to find one of those channels that aligns with kind of your customer behavior and your strengths as a company. And we'll talk about the criteria. And then you just really need to experiment in and iterate and mess around until you get it to work. And so you're going to experiment like crazy. You need to learn from every experiment. So like a simple example from my life, my main business relationship with my customers is I have a weekly newsletter. And, 1 week I sent this newsletter that I just thought was like, it's just informational, actionable, no sales, anything. And 1 week I sent one and the open rate totally crashed. So then I went in and I looked at, open rates by domain, and anything that went to like a company name domain got high open rates. Anything that went to Gmail had super low open rates. So I was like, okay, I must be going into the spam folder for the Gmail filter. Why? So then I took the text of the email and put it into a spam checker. And at the end, I had made a joke about blowing millions on speculative crypto. And it's like, when you use the words crypto and millions in email, Gmail thinks it's spam, right? And it's just like a million, one time I had a tweet storm that went viral and I ended up getting like 4,000 leads in a week from it. And I wrote 3 full typewritten pages of notes. I was like, what did I learn from this? Put a call to the action at the end. People love stories about humans. Publishing in the UK morning is a good time because it gets momentum before the East Coast wakes up. Like all these little details. And I was just like, because especially when you get a winner, you've got to find the details. Anyway, so this is like super granular examples of what I mean by experimenting and learning. Let's talk about the channels, right? So I don't think this has changed too much since the dawn of time, but there's basically 5 major ways to get B2B leads. And of course, you can sort of mix and match, but each of these kind of makes sense in certain situations. So the first one that I think everyone thinks of and everyone tries is outbound. And I mean, to be honest, it's hard. It's very hard to do it well. It used to be like in the old days, you could build a business around it. I don't know of companies that are successful at huge scale doing it now, but at small to medium scale, again, if you really commit to experiment and master it and buy all the different burner domains and, you've got good lists and refined ICP, you can generate leads. But in the beginning, use it, but mostly use connections and warm intros because it's a great way to
Mm.
get your first 10, 20, 30 customers in a high touch way, because intros and referral outbounds work really well. Also, outbound makes sense, especially if it's a product that nobody's looking for,
Mm-hmm.
because nobody like ever imagined it might exist. So anyways, inbound is basically, I mean, I guess everyone knows what it is, but you're sort of putting content out there and drawing people to it and then converting them to leads and then telling them stuff. This works nicely if like two things are true. First of all, is there something people are looking for? Maybe they're not actually looking for your product, but maybe they're doing informational searches for things that would eventually lead to your product. Payment card industry. Someone might Google, what is PCI compliance?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then at some point, they're going to probably need a PCI compliance audit, right? So if you can kind of know like what is the information diet that leads customers to you. And then the second piece is you need a source of good information. That could be anything from like your business, where you've got you, who's a co-founder who runs podcasts, creates information, puts
Mm-hmm.
videos out on social platforms. It could be like a data source, like ChartMogul. You know, they have huge reams of data on SaaS conversion rates, retention rates, average order value, revenue retention, logo retention. And so they publish all of that content, you know, without showing individual company details.
Mm-hmm.
And SaaS founders just eat that stuff up. So that's a great source of leads for them. You know, whatever real estate site does it with property listings. So if you've got some kind of source of content, then that lends itself to outbound. If your business or one of your founders has a big social media following, inbound, then that lends itself to inbound.
Mm-hmm.
Influencer, which is kind of I'd say the newest one.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that sort of sits somewhere between paid and inbound, in the sense that like it's paid, like the unit economics have to work. And then it's kind of like inbound in the sense that you've got to understand your customer's information diet and know who they follow and what they care about, and what they listen to. And anyways, so, I mean, we could talk a little bit about paid. It's hard for B2B because no one's going to like click on an ad and spend $3,000 a month for a B2B SaaS contract.
Right.
But there are ways to make it work, like, for example, using paid to distribute lead magnets.
Mm-hmm.
And then following up, you know, if you're getting qualified customers through those lead magnets, or if you're going to be doing outbound, you can pre-warm that list by showing them ads, you know, just to get them familiar with your brand, so that when you call, you know, they're like, oh yeah, I know you guys. And,
Right.
you know, turn a cold call into a warm call. But what needs to work for paid is you need to be like, have a lot of data, be very good at targeting, at direct response content and copy, and the unit economics have to be there. Like if it's an 8-month integration cycle and you're not going to see money for a year, you know, after they sign up, you're not going to be able to afford ads unless you've got like a ton of credit or deep pockets. So what have we covered here? We're missing partners and PLG. So partners, I'd say, first of all, nobody will do partners for the money. Affiliate is just like, I've not, in, you know, tell me if someone knows better, but I've not seen a company who like their main growth lever is affiliates or people recommending for money. And think about it. If you're a finance director at a Fortune 500 company, are you going to recommend software to get a $25 or $100 Amazon gift card? No, you're busy.
Yeah.
So partner means that your product enables them to hit their business goals. Classic case is Xero made accountants' lives much easier because they didn't have to deal with shoeboxes full of receipts. So accountants pretty much forced Xero on all their clients. When I was at PayPal, we worked with shopping carts and hosts because e-commerce companies make a percentage of the merchant's revenue. And if the merchant can't get credit card processing and a merchant account set up, they're not going to make any revenue. So they're very happy to say, we're pre-integrated with PayPal. You can start taking payments from day one. So, you know, they were like, they ended up, remember I said like all of PayPal's growth came from 5 things? About 30% of it came just from being pre-integrated with shopping carts. So you've got to figure out, like, again, if you map your customer's journey, what are all the services they use upstream of yours? And could any of those benefit from partnering with you? And then just to validate that, I would suggest find a few like small players in the space. Don't go for the big gorilla right away. Have coffee, talk to the founder. Could this work? We've got this, you've got that. If yes, then like be light on the legals, just write a friendly deal, try it out. Will their salespeople actually sell your product? Will their customers buy it? You know, just like try out, does the unit economics work as well as it does on paper? You know, just try it all out. Anyway, that's partners. And then the last one that I think everyone gets a little too excited about is product-led growth. I know that's like the super buzzword if you scroll social media or whatever, but just to be clear, product-led growth is not word of mouth. It's not referrals. Referrals are always going to be your highest quality traffic source, but it's very, very hard to scale them. So what product-led growth is really specifically your product is more valuable to your customers if they bring in other people onto the platform, particularly if those other people work for other companies. PayPal, was a big one. eBay sellers would make their buyers want to use PayPal, but like classic Zoom, DocuSign, Dropbox, any of those where you've got a connection between two companies. A lot of those procurement and purchasing platforms and all the suppliers have to go on it. So there just has to be like a company to company use case. Anyway, that's PLG. But the bottom line is like, based on like what I just said, because it's not that complicated, which of these feels like it could be a fit for you in terms of like the unit economics make sense, your audience would actually be there, you could execute it, and then go try it, and you're going to screw it up and screw it up as quickly as possible and learn and experiment and refine until you get it working.
And in terms of the responsibility within inside a company to execute these and to measure, and it kind of, you're going to get to a point where you're going to need to hire someone dedicated to this kind of position, whether you contract them in or you have them on staff. What is that trigger point that you've seen in companies when it makes sense that at that point they need to stop kind of trying to do it amongst the founding team or whatever, and to really dedicate someone to that? Like, what's that kind of trigger point?
This is such a controversial topic. I mean, like I'm in founder group chats, and this is just the question. So the first thing, you remember you asked me about big mistakes, and literally the second thing I said was like, hire the big muckety muck CMO to, turn on the tap. I love when they say like turn on the tap. So I'd say in the beginning, if you hire someone early, I would go for a bright generalist junior employee, typically not someone with a marketing background, but somebody with, first of all, just like a STEM or an engineering background, somebody who can think scientifically, first principles, reasoning, and then maybe someone who brings a skill that you don't have. So if, for example, you're not a great writer and you're using outbound, you need someone who knows about writing. If you're not great with tech and you're doing paid, you'll need someone who can set up tracking and analytics software, and just get them like work side by side with them, like almost like you'd use AI, like they're a collaborator in the thinking process and doing a lot of the execution. And I just have like one person like that you've got great collaborative rhythm with, sort of like a product manager and a technical co-founder or something. Then once you get something working, then you're going to be able to figure out, okay, to automate and scale this, here's these other skills we need. If it's inbound, you might need someone who's good at SEO. If it's a social media, you may need like a video team, production team, or whatever. So then figure out what are the other skills we need to scale this. And
that's a really good answer. Yeah, I mean, I think I can understand, and we hear a lot the same way in the sales aspect of what you just mentioned in marketing, where it's like, well, let's bring in the big VP of sales, and then, then the same tap will be turned on. But I think the idea of bringing someone in who's probably quite hungry, who possibly won't remain in that role forever, right? But it's like a great gateway entry. They can apply those other skills and them being a consumer as well into their role, rather than sort of, if you come with pre-existing ideas about what marketing is and kind of just doing marketing, it isn't really what you need at that point. I think that's great advice.
There's actually more upside, because often those employees, if you get the right ones, end up scaling and being your most senior people. Because you'll spot that talent early. Like at Wise, originally TransferWise, their first hire was an SEO guy named Nilan, and he's now C-level head of product and growth and a board member.
Yeah, there you go. That's wacky. That's amazing. So, that's a really good.
I'm a
good
huge
example.
fan of ability over experience for these early growth hires.
Totally. So what if you were to reflect on what you mentioned? We talked about the different channels. We talked about different approaches. We talked about sort of common mistakes. We talked about hiring for this lead gen. What does good look like? Like, you've seen some great companies do this at scale. You've seen some other companies, many companies who are struggling with this. What does good look like? And what are the kind of key, maybe key metrics, 2 or 3 metrics that you're looking at a high level to know that this kind of lead gen strategy is working for?
I mean, ultimately the best companies have figured out one or two or three levers,
Mhm.
and they know them and they focus on them, and they're
Mm.
constantly 80% of their resources are going to be running that and optimizing that.
Mhm.
Like I talked to a lady who worked for a multi-billion-dollar SaaS business, and she said they were running 1,000 experiments a week on their funnel. So they're not always chasing new shiny objects,
Mhm.
and they built it out. And so the metrics they're looking at are like, what are the right metrics for this business? What's our return on ad spend for these leads? There's all these. At the end, you have a North Star, whatever that's. It's not
Mm.
profit or revenue. It's some customer usage metric, which, because customers are what bring us profit or revenue,
Yeah, yeah.
not the other way around. Well, actually, both ways. But anyway, focus on, and then you've got a bunch of ratios that make that
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Sales close rate, MQL to SQL conversion, blah, blah, blah. And so you're looking at those. And that's, as I said, 80% of your business, of your attention on the growth side. 20% is horizon scanning and experimenting and trying crazy things.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because in growth, things age and atrophy. Like good accounting now looks like good accounting anything back to like Sarbanes-Oxley. Like
Mm.
most disciplines don't change that fast, but
Mm.
things atrophy in growth so fast. Like creative, like once you see a cold email subject line like that, are you the right person to talk to about blah blah blah? Like once someone sees that two or three times, it stops working.
Yeah.
But same thing, the channels, the technology, influencers wasn't a thing in B2B a few years
Yeah.
ago. So
Yeah.
you just always got to have like 20% of your time experimenting on like
Yeah.
big, bold new experiments.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I think that probably sounds it's an 80-20 rule. Again, we've heard that many times, but I think the 80 is quite high in my opinion to think of spending it on those just those growth levers and really driving those. And the simple, like you mentioned, say that this 1,000 experiment thing, listing and finding those experiments to do is probably one of the jobs, but then working out how to implement those experiments and then measure them and then going on, that's the complexity. Is that right? Is that how you see it in terms of the complex part of this?
For them, I mean, you cannot experiment at that scale without a very good process and systems. So they have
Right.
built their own software for it. And what they've done is they've pushed experimentation out to every individual,
Mm.
which is the only way to really be able to do it at scale. The
Mm.
hard thing, the thing to get right though, is that people are running good experiments and not just ticking boxes, which means they need to understand the customer experience, be able to break an idea down into a testable hypothesis.
Right.
Yeah, so that's almost the harder part. It's just getting a team of non-scientists to learn to think like.
There's a lot of information out there, particularly on LinkedIn, around technologies to use in lead gen. And in my opinion, and it is my opinion, there's a lot of bad information out there about how you can just use technology and it'll save your career, it'll save your startup, it'll grow you to 10 million in 2 weeks. So yeah, like I'm seeing a lot of information about using a stack to kind of automate your entire lead gen process almost with AI, right? And you talked about that at the top of this, where you don't want to be outsourcing this whole thing because it's a very core part of the growth strategy. And so to counter that, I suppose that wave of kind of just outsourcing that whole bit, some of that is useful, right? Some of this technology that's been built is clearly useful. Wading your way through this kind of AI story as a founder who's perhaps not AI savvy or even marketing savvy, let's say they're very technical. How do you pick out the best bits of that? Like, what are the best uses of that AI technology that you believe are really valuable to startups?
I mean, it's astounding, but just in the last 12 months, there are now tools to cheapen and automate every single piece of this.
Yeah.
I mean, from like, Phantom Buster for scraping and building lists, and Clay for enrichment, and Claude for writing, and all kinds of tools to automate processes and help you thinking. So I think about this on a few levels, right? There's like kind of the Iron Man suit level one, which is just like, I want to do all the things I'm already doing, but you do them for me. And so I have no employees and it's 50 times, 1,000 times faster, which is great if the stuff you're doing is the right stuff. So step two is like, no AI is going to be any better than the prompts. No automation tool is going to be any better than the instruction set. So back to everything I've been saying in this conversation, like, do you actually understand who your customers are, where they hang out, what they care about, what objections they're going to have before they'll even fill out your, book a demo form? Like, do you actually know do you know which channel makes sense for you? Do you know if you can get to good unit economics and how? So like the thinking level of it, and the AI even can help you think through that if you know to ask like the right questions. So for me, that's level 2. And then level 3 is like, can the AI actually make you better? So I'm super excited. Like I just upgraded from Claude 3.7 to Claude 4. And there's a lot of discussion about this now. This is like hot off the presses this week. But my main use case is writing my newsletter and my LinkedIn posts, not writing them, but editing them. And it's gone from sort of congratulating me on what great work I've done to totally negging me and like tearing me apart and like,
Right.
looks like you didn't put a lot of thought into this. This reads like a summary. What's the most interesting point here? It's like, which, I think most people might not like that, but for me,
Sure.
I love that because I want Claude to make me better, And so I think that's like the next level is being open to and figuring out where do you need to grow and how can these tools help me become a better user of these tools?
Brilliant. That's great. I'm glad I asked. Thanks, Matt. Great finish to that. Look, we really appreciate you sharing all your expertise. Really like what you're doing in System, and we'll be following on for sure. And if anyone needs some great content, you can find Matt in many different places on the web and get some great resources into your inbox. So thanks again, Matt, and we look forward to talking soon.
My
Appreciate it.
pleasure, Ben. Great chatting to you.